Mara Whitfield hit the saloon floor hard, her palms scraping raw against the boards, and she did not cry out. She reached. She reached for the folded paper the sheriff had knocked from her hand, and his boot came down on her fingers before she could close them. The whole room watched. 40 men, and not one of them moved. "Please," she said, hating the word, even as it left her. "That's all I have left of my father." And Sheriff Amos Rusk smiled down at her like she was already dead. If you love stories where a woman with nothing left finally finds someone willing to stand beside her, please subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. And do me a kindness, comment the name of the city where you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. The doors of the Red Ash Crossing Saloon swung shut behind Mara Whitfield, and the piano stopped. It did not stop slowly. It stopped like a man had put his hand flat across the strings. One moment there was music and the low churn of 40 voices, and the next there was nothing but the creak of the doors settling and the scrape of her own boots on the floor. She had expected that. She had told herself on the long ride down out of the timber that the room would go quiet the second they saw a woman come in alone. She had rehearsed it. She had promised herself she would not stop walking. She kept walking. "Afternoon," she said to no one and to all of them. Nobody answered. A man near the faro table turned his shoulder to her, slow, deliberate, the way you turn from something you have already decided not to see. A woman in a red wrapper on the stairs looked down at her with a face that was almost pity and almost warning, and then looked away too. Mara reached the bar. The bartender was a heavy man with sleeve garters and a mustache waxed flat, and he was already shaking his head before she opened her mouth. "We don't serve—" "I'm not here to drink." Her voice held. That was the thing she was proudest of later when she went over it in her mind 100 times. Her voice held. "I'm looking for Sheriff Amos Rusk. I was told he takes his afternoons in here." The bartender's eyes flicked past her shoulder. Just a flick. But she caught it, and she understood, and she felt the cold settle into her stomach where the fear lived. He was already in the room. "Well now." The voice came from the back, easy and unhurried, a big man's voice that had never once in its life had to be raised. "Somebody's come all the way down the mountain to find me." Mara turned. Sheriff Amos Rusk sat at a corner table with his chair tipped back and his boots crossed on the wood. He was a broad man gone a little soft at the middle, with a gray mustache and small pale eyes that did not blink enough. There was a plate in front of him with the bones of a chicken on it. There was a girl half his age standing behind his chair with her hand on his shoulder, and she took her hand away when Mara looked at her. "Sheriff Rusk," Mara said. "Miss." He tipped his head, not his hat. His hat stayed on. "You've got the advantage of me. I don't believe I know your face. You knew my father's." The room did not breathe. Rusk set his boots down off the table. He did it slow. Every man in that saloon watched him do it the way you watch a snake uncoil, and Mara understood then exactly how much this town belonged to this one man. "Did I?" Rusk said. "Corwin Whitfield. He had the spring claim up on Ash Peak, the high water, the good grazing on the North Bench. He filed it lawful in the spring of '79, and he paid his dust, and he got his receipt, and then last November he died of a fever in a line shack with nobody but his horse to hear him." She had not meant to say all of it. She had meant to be cold. But it came out of her in a rush, and her hands had begun to shake, so she pressed them flat against her apron. "And when I went to the county office to set the claim in my name, the record was gone. Just gone. Torn clean out of the book. And a man behind the counter told me the spring belonged to the Ash Valley Cattle Company now, and that I should go home." "Sounds like sound advice," Rusk said. A few men laughed, not loud, the kind of laugh you let out only when you're sure it's safe. Mara felt her face go hot. She reached into her boot. She had to bend to do it, and she hated bending in front of them. Hated the vulnerability of it, and she came up with a folded square of paper, soft and gray from a year of being carried against skin. "This is his receipt," she said. She held it up. Her hand was steady again. Anger had steadied it. Filed and stamped. His name, the claim number, the section lines. The office copy's gone, but he kept his own the way careful men do, and I have it right here. So I'm not asking you to give me anything, Sheriff. I'm telling you what's mine, and I'm asking you to make the county honor its own book." For a long moment, Rusk just looked at the paper. Then he stood up. He was bigger standing than he'd looked sitting. He came around the table without any hurry at all, and the men near him leaned back out of his way, and he crossed the floor to her with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt, and he stopped close enough that she could smell the chicken grease and the whiskey on him. "Let me see it," he said, gentle as a preacher. Mara did not move. "Come on now." He put out his hand, palm up, broad and clean. "You want the county to honor it, I'm the county. Let me have a look." And God help her. She wanted to believe it could be that simple. She wanted it so badly that for 1/2 of 1 second, she almost put the paper in his hand. Then she saw his eyes, and she knew. "I'll hold it," she said. "You can read it fine from there." Something moved in Rusk's face. Just a flicker, quick as the bartender's glance. Then it was gone, smoothed over, and he smiled wider than before. "Smart girl," he said. "Corwin raised you smart. He must have. Shame he didn't raise you to know when a fight's already lost." He turned his head, not taking his eyes off her. Jonah. A younger man near the door straightened. He wore a deputy's star and a look that did not match it. A decent, tired face, a mouth that wanted to say something and didn't. "Sheriff," Jonah said. "Get the door." Jonah Pike did not move for a moment. Mara saw it. She would remember it. He hesitated just long enough that she knew there was a man in there somewhere under the badge, and then he crossed and set his back against the doors and folded his arms, and the last way out of the room closed behind him. "Now," Rusk said, "let's you and me have a real conversation. There's nothing to talk about. The paper's plain. The paper." Rusk chuckled low. "You keep saying that word like it's a rifle. Miss Whitfield, that is your name, ain't it? Whitfield? Let me tell you something about paper in this country. Paper's what a lawyer sells you back east. Out here, a thing belongs to the man who can hold it. Your daddy held that spring 5 years because I let him. Because he was a quiet man who kept to his mountain and didn't stir up the small ranchers with talk about how there was water enough for everybody." He leaned in a 1/2 inch. "You planning to be quiet like your daddy, or are you planning to be a problem?" "I'm planning to get what's mine." "Then you're planning to be a problem. There are 20 families down this valley," Mara said, and now her voice did rise because she couldn't hold it down anymore. 20 families watching their wells go dry this summer, while your cattle company sits on the only high water for 40 miles and won't sell a drop under $1 a head. My father found that spring. My father meant it to be shared. You didn't steal a piece of ground from one dead man. Sheriff, you stole the summer out from under this whole valley, and every man in this room knows it. She said it loud enough that the whole room heard, and the whole room said nothing. She looked at them. She turned in a slow circle right there in the middle of the floor, and she looked at all of them. The faro players, the men at the bar, the drovers by the window, the woman on the stairs. 40 faces. Some looked at the floor. Some looked at the ceiling. One old man in the corner met her eyes and held them, and there was shame in his, a deep and terrible shame, and he did not stand up either. "None of you," she said. It came out almost wondering. "None of you. They're smart," Rusk said softly behind her. "You should try it." And then he took the paper. He did it faster than a soft man ought to move his hand, flashing out and closing on the receipt, and tearing it half out of her grip. She grabbed for it, she got a corner, a fistful, and for one wild second they both had it, her, and this big smiling man, hauling at a soft gray square of paper that was the last honest thing her father had ever touched. "Let go," Rusk said, still pleasant. "It's mine." He wrenched it. She held on, and so he did the thing that 40 men would swear afterward they had not clearly seen. He set his hand flat against her collarbone, and he shoved. Mara went down. She hit the floor hard on her hip, and her palms and the pain of it lit up white behind her eyes, and the paper tore. Half of it stayed in her fist. The other half came away in his hand, and he looked at his half, and he smiled. And then he did the worst thing. He dropped it. He let it flutter down to the boards in front of her face, and he set his boot on it, and he ground it slow into the tobacco spit and the dust and the dropped chicken grease of that floor, twisting his heel like a man putting out a match. "There," Rusk said. "Now it belongs to the man who can hold it." Mara stayed on the floor. She would think about that a great deal afterward, why she stayed down that one extra moment. It wasn't the fall. The fall didn't keep her down. It was the boot. It was watching her father's name go gray and then black under a corrupt man's heel, while 40 living men watched and drank and said nothing, and something in her that had held all the way down the mountain, all the way across that floor, all through this smiling, patient cruelty. Something finally cracked, and out of the crack, quiet, came the word she had promised herself she would never say to a man like this. "Please." Rusk cocked his head. What was that? Please. Her voice broke on it. She hated it. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers on the ruined edge of the paper sticking out from under his boot, not pulling, just touching it the way you touch the hand of someone dying. "Please. That's all I have left of him. Please." For the length of one heartbeat, the whole saloon was so still, she could hear the flies. Then Sheriff Amos Rusk lifted his boot and set it down again, harder on her outstretched fingers. Mara made a sound. Not a scream. A small, bitten-off animal sound, the sound of a person who has spent a lifetime learning not to make sounds. And still not one of those 40 men stood up. "Now here's my counsel free of charge," Rusk said, grinding down just enough to keep the sound coming. "You're going to get up. You're going to walk out that door. You're going to get on whatever sorry horse carried you down here, and you're going to ride back up your mountain, and you are never going to say the words Spring or Claim or Whitfield in this town again. And if you do that—" He eased the pressure, generous now magnanimous. "Then this misunderstanding is over, and nobody has to remember your father was ever fool enough to think water belonged to anybody but the man who—" "That's enough!" The voice came from the far end of the room. It was not a loud voice. That was the thing. Every voice in that saloon for the last 10 minutes had been a performance, Rusk's velvet cruelty, the men's careful silence, Mara's cracking pleas. This voice was none of those things. It was flat and low, and it came from a man who had not spoken because he had not needed to, and it fell across the room like a door opening onto cold air. Every head turned. He had come in without anyone marking it, through the back past the storeroom, the way a man comes into a place when he has spent years not wanting to be seen. He stood with his shoulder against the wall by the end of the bar, and he was tall and lean and burned dark by high country sun, with dark hair going gray at the temples, under a worn brown hat, and a week of stubble on a hard jaw. A faded blue work shirt, a dark leather vest gone shiny at the seams, and on his hip, worn low and tied down the way a man ties it who has actually had to use it, a revolver. He was looking at Mara, not at Rusk, at Mara on the floor with a corrupt man's boot on her hand. And there was something in his face that she would spend a long time trying to name, and the closest she ever came was this. He looked like a man watching something happen that had already happened to him once. "Well," Rusk said. His voice had changed, only a little, but it had changed. "Look what came down out of the trees. Boys, some of you might not have met him. This here's the mountain hermit. Lives up past the tree line with the elk and the ghosts. Comes to town about twice a year to remind us all he's still breathing." He smiled, but it was a different smile now, thinner. "What's the matter, Boone? Somebody up there die and leave you a conscience?" The man named Boone did not answer that. He pushed off the wall. He did it slow, unhurried, and he did not go for his gun, and he did not raise his hands, and he crossed the floor toward them, with the whole room watching, and he stopped. Not in front of Rusk, not squaring off. Nothing so simple as that. He stopped beside Mara. Then he crouched down. He came down on one knee right there in the filth of that floor, easy, like a man crouching to check a horse's hoof, and he brought his face level with hers, and he did not so much as glance up at the sheriff standing over both of them now. "Ma'am," he said quiet just to her, "can you take your hand back if he moves his boot?" Mara stared at him. Her fingers were screaming. "Yes," she managed. "All right." Elias Boone finally looked up. He looked up the length of Amos Rusk, from the boot on the woman's hand to the small pale eyes, and he said in that same flat voice with nothing in it and everything under it, "Move your foot." "Or," Rusk said, "move your foot. Amos. You giving me orders in my own town, Boone, on my own floor in front of my own men." Rusk spread his hands, playing to the room, but his eyes stayed on Boone, and there was a new thing in them now that had not been there before, and it took Mara a second to understand what it was. It was caution. "I'm not giving you an order," Elias said. "I'm telling you a fact. You've got your boot on a woman's hand, and I'm kneeling next to her, and I'm going to keep kneeling here real peaceful until you take it off. That's all. That's the whole thing. You take your boot off her hand and go sit back down and finish your chicken, and nothing happens today that anybody's got to lie about tomorrow." A pause. A long one. "Or you don't." "Or I don't," Rusk repeated. "Then it stops being peaceful," Elias said. "And Amos, I've had a long, quiet year up on that mountain to think about the last time you and I stood in a room together. I've thought about it most every day. I'd take it as a mercy if you gave me a reason." Nobody moved. The girl behind Rusk's table had backed all the way to the wall. The bartender had both hands flat on the bar where everyone could see them. Over by the door, Deputy Jonah Pike had come off the wood and taken one step forward and stopped his hand nowhere near his gun, his face torn wide open with something that looked like hope and looked like terror. And Mara, on the floor, watched Amos Rusk do the arithmetic. She watched him weigh the room. 40 men who would swear to whatever he told them to swear. His deputy at the door. His own gun on his own hip. And one lean, weathered stranger kneeling in the dirt, with his hand resting easy on his thigh, 6 inches from a tied-down revolver, looking up at him with the patient, bottomless calm of a man who genuinely in his heart did not care which way it went. That was the thing that decided it. Mara saw the moment Rusk understood it. You could bluff a man who wanted to live. You could not bluff a man who had already made his peace. Rusk lifted his boot. Mara pulled her hand back and cradled it against her chest, and the pain came flooding in behind the pressure, and she bit down on it and made no sound at all. "There," Rusk said, loud, jovial, reclaiming the room the only way he had left. "See, civilized. Nobody wants trouble on a hot afternoon." He backed up a step, then another, his eyes never leaving Boone. "You made your gesture hermit, real gallant, kneeling in the spit for a girl who's going to be gone by dark anyhow. You want to play her champion? You go right ahead. But you remember something." The velvet came back into his voice, and with it the cruelty, because he had to leave with something and this was all he had. "That paper's ruined. There's no county record, there's no claim. There's her word and a torn-up receipt and a dead man nobody'll speak for against the sheriff and the Ash Valley Cattle Company and every soul in this room." He smiled around at them. "Ain't that right, boys?" And 40 men murmured that it was right. Elias Boone stood up. He did it slow, the way he did everything, and he reached down as he rose and put out his hand to Mara, palm up the way Rusk had, and for one bitter instant she flinched from it because she had learned in the last 10 minutes exactly what an open hand from a man in this town was worth. Elias saw the flinch. He did not take it back. He held the hand there steady, and he said low, "It's just a hand up, ma'am. Nothing's owed." Mara took it. He drew her up off the floor, careful and slow, mindful of her crushed fingers, and he set her on her feet and let go the second she was steady, stepping back to give her room, and she stood there swaying and furious and blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. And she got her balance and she lifted her chin. Then she bent down, right there in front of all of them, in front of Rusk. She bent down and she peeled her father's ruined receipt up off the filthy floor, the ground in half and the torn half both, and she pressed them together against her palm, as if she could make them whole by wanting it, and she straightened up with the wet gray scraps held to her chest, and she looked Amos Rusk dead in his pale, unblinking eyes. "You're right," she said. The room went still again. Even Rusk looked surprised. "You heard me," Mara said. "You're right. The paper's ruined. There's no county record. It's my word and a torn receipt against the whole of this town." She took a breath, and it shook, and she let it shake, and she went on anyway. "But I'm going to tell you something. Sheriff and I want every man in this room to hear it, because I'm only going to say it the once. I came down this mountain today thinking I was here to fight for a spring, a piece of water, my father's ground." She shook her head slow. "That's not what this is anymore. You put your boot on my hand and you ground my daddy's name into the floor, and you did it smiling in front of 40 men because you wanted them to watch. You wanted them to see what happens. You wanted them scared." Her voice dropped, and somehow that was worse than shouting. "Well, I saw it too, Sheriff. I saw exactly what happens in Red Ash Crossing to a person with nothing left. And now I can't unsee it. So I'm not leaving." "You surely are," Rusk said, but the velvet had gone thin. "I'm not leaving," Mara said again. "I'm going to stand in this town until somebody in it finds the sand to stand next to me. One person. That's all it takes. Sheriff, one person to go first. And then it ain't so lonely for the next one. My father used to say that." Her voice cracked and she let it. "One person to go first." And she turned deliberately and looked at the lean, dark stranger who had knelt in the dirt beside her. Elias Boone met her eyes. Something passed between them, brief, wordless, and older than the both of them. Then he turned to Rusk and touched the brim of his hat, polite as Sunday, and he said, "Reckon she's already got her one." He tipped his hat to Mara. A small thing quick, but the whole room saw it. This hard mountain man tipping his hat to a woman who'd just been thrown on the floor like she was worth tipping it to. And then he set his hand light against Mara's shoulder, just for a second, just enough to turn her toward the doors, and he walked her out past the frozen bartender, past the woman on the stairs whose eyes had gone wide and wet, past the old man in the corner who was gripping the edge of his table, white-knuckled with shame, past Deputy Jonah Pike, who stepped aside to let them by, and would not meet the sheriff's eyes when he did it. At the doors, Elias paused. He looked back over his shoulder at Amos Rusk one last time, and he did not say anything, and he did not need to, because his look said all of it. "I remember. I have not forgotten. And I am done being up on my mountain." Then the doors swung shut behind them, and the piano did not start again. Outside, the heat came down on Mara like a hand. It had to be over 100 in the street. The sun stood white and pitiless straight overhead, and the dust was the color of old bone. And away east, the sky held that hard, brassy haze that meant no rain. No rain, no rain. The same sky that had stood over this valley for 11 weeks running, while the wells went down and the grass burned brown, and the small ranchers started selling off their cattle at a nickel on the dollar because they couldn't water them. Mara made it to the hitch rail and put her good hand on it and stood there breathing. "Let me see the hand," Elias said. "It's fine." "Ma'am." "It's fine." She turned on him, and all the fury she hadn't been able to spend on Rusk came up and out at the only man who'd been kind, which is how it goes. "Why'd you do that in there? Why'd you kneel down in the... Why'd you do that?" Elias considered her. He didn't seem stung. "You'd rather I didn't. I'd rather know why." She was shaking now, the shakes coming on hard the way they do after when the standing up part is done. "Men in this country don't do things for free. Not a one. You heard him. I'll be gone by dark. I'm nobody, there's no paper, there's nothing in it. So why? What do you want?" Elias was quiet a moment. 12 years ago, he said. "I had a ranch about 9 miles east of here. Good ranch. 200 head, a wife, a spread of bottomland that took me and my brother 11 years to prove up. And a man swore a false oath in a courtroom about a boundary line, and the man who paid him to swear it was already sitting in the sheriff's chair by then. And I stood up in front of that court and I told the truth. And I had the paper. I had the paper, ma'am, same as you. And it did not matter one bit. I lost the ranch. I lost more than the ranch." His jaw worked. "And I went up on that mountain to die slow, and I've been dying slow up there for 12 years, and it's been quiet, and I thought I'd made my peace with quiet." He looked at the ruined receipt still clutched in her hand. "And then a girl I never met comes down out of nowhere and says the words, 'I have the paper,' to that same smiling man on that same floor, and gets thrown down for it, same as me. And 40 men watch, same as they watched me." He met her eyes. "You asked what I want, Miss Whitfield. I'll tell you plain. I want to find out if it can go different the second time. That's the whole of it. That's every bit of what I want." Mara stared at him. Behind her, the saloon doors and the town and the sheriff. Ahead of her, this stranger and the white heat and the long road up into the burning mountains. And nothing. No plan. No ally. No record. No proof. But a torn, wet scrap of paper and her own 2 feet. "Mara," she said finally. "My name. It's Mara." "Elias Boone." He touched his hat again. "That's a lot to carry 12 years, Mr. Boone." "Yes, ma'am." "You reckon it can go different?" And Elias Boone looked past her up the street, up past the false-fronted stores, and the water trough gone to mud, and the county office where a book sat with a page torn out of it, up to the high blue timber country, where the last honest water in 40 miles ran cold and clear out of the rock her father had died for. "I don't know," he said, "but I aim to find out with you, if you'll have the company." And Mara Whitfield, who had come down that mountain alone, and had every intention of climbing back up it alone, felt something she had not felt since the night a rider brought word her father was dead, felt the smallest thing, the first small thing loosen in her chest. "I'll have the company," she said. Down the street in the shadow of the blacksmith's shop, an old half-deaf man named Silas Reed had been watching the whole thing through the open door of his forge. He had watched the girl go in. He had watched them come out. He had watched the mountain man tip his hat. And Silas Reed, who had seen a certain thing a certain night by lantern light and had said nothing for a year, because saying it would have cost him his life. Silas. Reed set down his hammer and wiped his hands slow on his leather apron, and looked at these 2 strangers standing together in the terrible heat, and thought for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, a man might live long enough to tell the truth and still be breathing after. He picked the hammer back up, but he'd remember later that that was the moment. That was the hour the quiet started to break. They did not get 10 steps up the street before Silas Reed came out of his forge. He came out fast for an old man wiping his hands, and he planted himself in the middle of the road in front of them, with his gray head cocked and one hand cupped behind his ear. "You," he said too loud, the way the deaf are too loud. "Girl, you Corwin's daughter." Mara stopped. "You knew my father. Speak up, my ears is bad." "You knew my father?" she said louder. "I shot his horses 11 years. Silas looked her up and down, and his face worked something moving under the soot and the gray stubble. "You got his jaw. God help you, you got his stubborn jaw." Then his eyes cut sideways up the street toward the saloon, and dropped his voice as low as a deaf man can, which was not low at all. "You come in my shop, both of you, off the street. Rusk's got a boy watches the road from the hotel porch, and he's watching us right now." Elias did not turn to look. He'd already clocked the boy. Mara saw it in the set of his shoulders. "He's right," Elias said quiet. "Come on." The forge was dark and close, and smelled of iron and coal smoke, and Silas pulled the door to behind them, leaving it open just a crack, and he stood at that crack watching the street with one eye while he talked. "I've been a coward a year," he said. "Ain't proud of it. But I'm too old to be a coward, and too old to care if I die, and them 2 things finally caught up with each other about 10 minutes ago, when I watched that man put his boot on your hand." He spat into the coal dust. "So here it is. The night your daddy's page went missing from the county book, I know when it went, and I know who took it because I seen it." Mara's whole body went still. "You saw it. Last November. Cold night, first real cold. I was up late fixing a wheel rim for the freight line, and I seen a lantern moving in the county office across the way past midnight, which ain't natural, so I looked." He tapped under his eye with a black finger. Deaf, not blind. I seen Amos Rusk stand at that counter with the big claim book open, and I seen him take a knife to it, cut a page clean out, held it to the lantern glass and read it, and smiled. I seen the smile, and then he burned it in the stove, right there. I watched your daddy's water go up the chimney. He swallowed. And I went home, and I locked my door, and I said not one word, because a man who tells that story is a man who don't wake up, and I've been carrying it like a stone ever since, and I am tired, girl. I am so tired of carrying it. You'd swear it, Elias said, not a question quite. In front of a judge. Silas laughed a dry, cracked sound. I'm 63 and half deaf, and I got no kin, and nothing left to lose but a forged Rusk'll burn the day I open my mouth. Yeah, I'd swear it. He looked at Mara. But it ain't enough. You hear me? One old deaf man saw a light in a window. That's what Rusk's lawyer'll call it. I can't prove what page. I can't prove whose claim. I can put Rusk in that office with a knife, but I can't put your daddy's name on the thing he cut, and that's the space he'll drive a wagon through. The little flare of hope in Mara's chest guttered. Then it's nothing. It ain't nothing, Elias said. It's a thread. You pull a thread, sometimes the whole thing comes. Sometimes it just breaks off in your hand, Mara said. Sometimes. Elias looked at her steady. You want to quit? No. Then it's a thread. Silas was watching them both, and something in his old face softened. There's more, he said. You want the rest? Give us the rest. Rusk didn't do it for the county. County don't want that spring. The Ash Valley Cattle Company wants it, the syndicate, the money men out of Denver. They've been buying up water 2 years, choking the small outfits, till they got to sell cheap or die. Your daddy's spring was the last free high water in the whole basin, and long as one honest claim sat on it, they couldn't close the noose. He jabbed a finger at Mara. Your daddy wasn't just a rancher with a spring girl. He was the one rock in the river. Kill his claim, the whole valley falls to the company by fall. That's why Rusk burned that page personal past midnight with his own hand. It weren't a favor, it was worth money. Big money. How much money makes the sheriff cut a page out of a book himself instead of sending a man? Elias said slowly, and Mara could hear him working it, turning it. A man does his own dirty work when he can't trust anybody else to know about it, which means the deal's not on paper anywhere Rusk's men could find it, which means it's in his office, Mara finished. Whatever the company paid him, however it's written, it's somewhere he keeps close. Silas grinned gap-toothed. Now you sound like your daddy. The boy on the hotel porch chose that moment to stand up. They all saw it through the crack in the door, the boy stretching, looking toward the forge, then turning and going inside quick, the way a boy goes when he's been sent to carry word. He's telling Rusk you didn't leave, Silas said. You got maybe an hour before the sheriff decides what to do about that. Then we don't waste it. Mara turned to Elias. The hotel. Beatrice Hale. Elias raised an eyebrow. On the ride down, my father's foreman told me old Tom before he passed. He said if I ever got in trouble in Red Ash to find the woman who runs the hotel, that she owed my father a kindness and never got to pay it. Mara was already moving toward the door. Silas, can she be trusted? Silas hesitated, and that hesitation cost Mara a heartbeat. Beatrice Hale is the most frightened, brave woman I ever knew, he said finally. She'll help you, but she'll cry the whole time she does it, and she'll hate herself for helping, and hate herself worse for wanting to run. Her man died 3 years back, and Rusk's had his boot on her ever since. You go gentle. I'm all out of gentle today, Mara said. Then you'll get nothing out of her. Elias put a hand on the door before she could open it. Silas is right. That woman's been squeezed 3 years. You go in hot, you go in angry. She'll shut like a clam and cry and tell you to leave, and she won't be wrong to. He looked at her, not unkind. You've got a right to your anger, Mara, but you can't spend it on the people you need. Spend it on Rusk. Save it for him. It was good advice, and she hated it the way she'd hated the advice about her hand, because it was true, and because it meant holding still when everything in her wanted to burn. She took a breath, let it out slow. All right, she said. gentle. They went out the back of the forge and around through the alley behind the mercantile, keeping off the main street and out of the boys' sight line. And Mara noticed Elias moved through the town like a man who'd learned it hard, every doorway clocked, every window, every place a man could stand and watch. 12 years on a mountain hadn't made him careless. It had made him a ghost. The hotel's kitchen door stood open to let the heat out, and a woman was in there working dough with her back to them, a heavy-set, gray-haired woman with flour to her elbows, and she was talking low to herself the way people do when they live alone with fear. "Mrs. Hale," Mara said soft. The woman spun with her hand to her chest, and there was flour on her face, and her eyes were the eyes of a woman who'd been waiting 3 years for the wrong knock at the door. "We're closed," she got out. "The dining room don't open till—" Then she saw Mara's dress, the dust, the way she cradled her hand, and her face changed. "You're the girl from the saloon. Oh, Lord, you can't be here. Do you know whose hotel this is? Do you know who—" "It's your hotel, ma'am," Elias said. Beatrice Hale looked at him, and whatever she saw made her go quiet. "It's your hotel," he said again, gentle. "Your name over the door. Your man built it. We just come to talk. 5 minutes. Then we're gone and nobody's got to know we stood in your kitchen." "Everybody'll know," Beatrice whispered. "There's nothing happens in this town he don't know." "Then 5 minutes won't cost you more than we already have," Mara said. She'd found the gentle. It was under the anger further down than she'd thought, but it was there. "Mrs. Hale, my name's Mara Whitfield. Corwin Whitfield's girl." The flower-white hand came up slow to Beatrice's mouth. "Corwin," she breathed. "Corwin's girl. Sweet Jesus, you look just—" She stopped, her eyes filled. "He was good to my Harold. When nobody in this town would lend Harold $1 to finish the hotel, your father rode down off that mountain and put the money in Harold's hand and said, 'Pay me when you can,' and never once came to collect. Corwin Whitfield was the last truly good man I ever—" And then she was crying just as Silas said she would, standing in her own kitchen with flour on her face, crying for a dead man she'd owed and never paid. Mara crossed the kitchen and took her floury hand in her good one and held it. Didn't say anything, just held it. And Beatrice Hale, crying, said the thing that changed everything. "Harold copied the book." Mara went cold all over. "What?" "My Harold." Beatrice wiped her face and left a smear of flour and tears. "He worked the county office nights before he built the hotel when we were saving. Bookkeeper. And he told me Rusk was starting to sell things that weren't his, to sell water and grazing, and Harold got scared because his name was in that book as the clerk of record, and if it ever came out, he'd hang alongside Rusk. So Harold, my Harold, he was a careful man. He made a copy, a private copy, of every entry he'd clerked. Kept it hid, said it was his insurance, said if Rusk ever tried to make him the goat, he'd have proof of what was really filed and when." Her voice dropped to nothing. "He died before he ever needed it. Heart just stopped one morning at the table, and I was too scared to even look for it. I knew it was somewhere in this house, and I never once went looking, because I was afraid of what I'd have to do if I found it. No? The kitchen was dead silent. "Beatrice," Elias said very carefully, "the way you'd speak to keep from spooking a horse. Are you telling us there might be a copy in this building right now of the page Rusk cut out of that book? If Harold ever clerked Corwin's claim—" Beatrice pressed her hand flat to her chest. "And he would have. He clerked everything those years. It'd be in his copy. The claim number, the section lines, the filing date. In Harold's own hand, dated the day it was really made, which is before the company ever—" She stopped, understanding hitting her the same instant it hit them. "Which proves the company's claim came after—" Mara said, hardly breathing. "Which proves the spring was my father's lawful first. Which proves Rusk didn't lose the record. He destroyed it, because Harold's copy will show what the real book said." "If I can find it," Beatrice said. "I don't know where he hid it. I only know it exists. Harold never told me the place said the fewer knew the safer I was. And there it was, the thread Elias talked about, and it hadn't broken off in her hand. It had led to a second thread thicker, and Mara felt the wild, dangerous rush of a person who'd walked into town with nothing, and now, an hour later, had a witness who saw the burning, and a widow who might hold a copy of the very page that burned. Then Beatrice's face crumpled again. But if I find it, if I bring it out, he'll know. He'll know it came from me, from Harold, and he'll take everything. This hotel's all I got. It's all that's left of my Harold. She looked at Mara with pure anguish. You're asking me to choose between honoring your good father and keeping the last thing my good husband built. How is that a fair thing to ask a widow? And Mara, who was all out of gentle that morning, but had somehow found the bottom of the barrel, said, It isn't. It isn't fair, and I won't pretend it is. Rusk made it so honoring the dead costs the living. Everything, that's his whole trick. That's how he wins. He makes good people pay for being good until they quit trying. She held the old woman's eyes. I can't promise you'll keep the hotel, Mrs. Hale. I'd be lying, and you've had enough men lie to you. But I can promise you this. If you help me, you won't be doing it alone in the dark like Harold planned. You'll be doing it in the daylight with folks standing next to you. And there's a difference. My father used to say it, one person goes first, and then it ain't so lonely for the next one. Jim bin Bumptor says. Beatrice Hale looked at her a long, long moment. You do have his jaw, she whispered. Then from the front of the hotel boots on the porch. Heavy ones. More than one man. Beatrice's face drained white. That's him. That's Rusk's walk. Oh God, the pantry, get in the pantry. No, Elias said. There's nowhere else. We're not hiding in your pantry, ma'am, and getting you hung for it if he finds us. Elias was already moving Mara toward the back door, calm as still water. We walk out the back slow like we've been buying eggs. You go serve him coffee and shake and cry, and you don't have to lie about the shaking or the crying, do you? He tipped his hat to her. Look for Harold's book, Mrs. Hale. Take your time. Take a week. Just look. The front door of the hotel opened. A voice called out. Not Rusk's deep or a stranger's, one of the company men, and that was somehow worse. Mrs. Hale sheriffed like a word about a girl. Elias got Mara out the back and around the corner of the woodshed a half-second before the kitchen door swung wide, and they stood there in the narrow gap between the shed and the fence, close, both of them holding their breath, and through the wall they heard Beatrice Hale's voice go up bright and false and terrified. Coffee, Sheriff, just made a pot. Where'd she go, Beatrice? Who now? The Whitfield girl. My boy says she never rode out. Say she come this way. I ain't seen a soul but you, Sheriff, and here I am with flour to my elbows, and no help, and the noon rush. A pause. A long one. Mara could hear her own heart. Elias's hand came up, not touching her, just up a small motion that said, Wait, wait, don't move. You'd tell me, Rusk said. Wouldn't you, Beatrice? If a stranger come asking you for something, you'd come to me? Course I would, Sheriff. Where else would I go? Another pause. Then Rusk's voice softer, and it made the hair stand up on Mara's arms. How's the hotel doing this summer? Beatrice, rooms filling up? Be a terrible thing, an old dry building like this time of year. All this heat, one spark. A beat. You be careful with your stove now. Old buildings burn awful fast. And boots going away off the porch back up the street. Mara realized her good hand had made a fist so tight her nails had cut her palm. She looked at Elias. His jaw was iron. He just threatened to burn her down, she whispered. To her face, over coffee. Yeah, that's not a man protecting a business deal, Elias. That's a man who's scared. She felt it land as she said it. He came to the hotel himself, within the hour. He didn't send a man, he came. Same as he cut the page himself, instead of sending a man. Silas said it, Rusk does his own dirty work when he's scared of what a witness might know. Her mind was racing now, fear turning to something sharper. He's not worried I'll make noise. He's worried I'll find something, which means there's something to find, and it's close, and he knows it. Elias looked at her with something new in his face. Respect, maybe. You think like your daddy was a lawman instead of a rancher. My daddy was smarter than any lawman I ever met." She pushed off the fence. "We need Jonah Pike." "The deputy." Elias frowned. "The deputy who blocked the saloon door on you an hour ago. The deputy who hesitated before he did it," Mara said. "You didn't see his face at the end, when you walked me out." He couldn't look at Rusk. A man who's all the way bought doesn't have trouble looking his boss in the eye. Jonah Pike's not bought. He's just scared, same as everybody in this whole town's scared, and scared men can be turned if you show them one other person already turned. She looked up the street toward the jailhouse. "And you just gave the whole saloon a demonstration of what turning looks like, Mr. Boone. Let's go find out if the deputy was watching." But finding Jonah Pike was not so simple, because Jonah Pike found them first. He was waiting in the alley behind the jail, in the shade alone, without his star. He'd taken it off. That was the first thing Mara saw, the pale patch on his vest, where the tin had been pinned, and the way a man carries himself different without the weight of it. He looked younger without it. He looked sick. "You can't be seen with me," he said before either of them spoke. His voice was low and fast. "And I can't be seen with you. So we make this quick, and we never had it." He looked at Mara, and there was shame all over him, the same shame she'd seen on 40 faces in the saloon, but this one had come out of hiding to face her with it. "I blocked that door on you. I want you to know I know what I did. I've blocked a lot of doors for that man, held a lot of things I shouldn't have held." His throat worked. "I told myself it was the badge, that I had to, that a deputy follows the sheriff, and then I watched him put his boot on your hand and grind it again when you said please, and I watched every man in that room let him, and I let him too, and something in me just—" He stopped. His hands were shaking. "I can't do it no more. I don't know how to be a man who did that and lives with it." "Then don't be that man," Mara said quietly. "It's not that simple, miss. It never is, but it starts that simple." She stepped closer. "Silas Reed saw Rusk burn my father's claim page in the county stove last November. Beatrice Hale may have a copy of that very page in her dead husband's hand. That's 2 people, deputy. 2 people already turned, standing in the daylight. I'm asking you to be the 3rd. Jonah Pike shut his eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking. Whatever proof you scrape together, a deaf man, a widow, an old receipt, it's got to hold up. And it won't, because it's all around Rusk. None of it's the deal itself. None of it's the thing that hangs him." He opened his eyes. "You want to know why I'm out here talking to you instead of hauling you in? Because I know where the thing is, the real thing, the thing that hangs him and the whole Ash Valley Cattle Company both. And I've known for a year, and I've been too much a coward to touch it." The alley went very still. "Where?" Elias said. "His office. Not the jailhouse, his private office in the back, the one only he's got a key to. There's a strongbox in the floor under his desk, bolted down. I've seen him open it maybe 3 times, always alone, always at night. And one time he was drunk and careless, and he had a paper out of it on the desk when I come in without knocking." Jonah's voice dropped to almost nothing. "It was a letter. From the company. From Denver. Setting out what they'd pay him spring by spring, claim by claim, as he cleared the small outfits off the water. A price list, miss. A price list for a whole valley with your father's spring on it, and Rusk's name signed at the bottom agreeing to it." He looked between them, wretched and afraid, and underneath it, finally, a little bit free. "That's the thing. That's what burns him, and the money men both. And it's in a bolted box in a locked room, and if I'm caught telling you this, I'm a dead man. And if you're caught reaching for it, you're dead too, and I still, God help me, I still just told you where it is." Mara couldn't speak. Elias couldn't either for a moment. It was more than a thread. It was the whole rope. "Why?" Elias finally said. "Why tell us if it's death?" Jonah Pike put his hand over the pale patch where his star used to be. "Because I took this off an hour ago, and I ain't put it back on," he said. "And I don't intend to. And a man's got to be something once he stops being a coward. I figured I'd try being the 3rd one to go first." A broken sound that was almost a laugh. "Your daddy's line, miss. It's all over town by supper. You know that every soul who was in that saloon heard you say it. One person goes first. Its folks are saying it to each other. Quiet. Scared. But they're saying it." And that was the thing that got Mara after everything, after the boot, and the burning, and the widow's tears, and the threats that her father's words were loose in the town, now passing hand to hand in the heat like a lit match, and she couldn't have called them back if she wanted to. "Then here's what we're going to do," she started to say. And the fire bell began to ring. It came from the far end of town, hard and fast and panicked. The sound that means now everyone. Now, and all three of them turned toward it, and over the rooftops in the white afternoon, a column of black smoke was already climbing into the brass-colored sky, thick and greasy and wrong. Jonah Pike's face went slack. "That's the hotel," he said. "That's Beatrice Hale's." Mara was already running. She ran with her crushed hand held to her chest, and her boots pounding the hard street, and Elias ran beside her, and Jonah came behind. And the whole town seemed to be pouring the same direction now out of the mercantile and the barber shop, and the assay office drawn by the bell. The hotel was burning from the back. The stable behind it had gone up first. That was plain even to Mara, as she came around the corner, the little stable and hayshed where Beatrice kept 2 horses, and the mules, and the flames had it whole roaring. And the wind, the endless dry summer wind, was carrying sparks up onto the hotel's shake roof, and the shakes were catching one by one like matches struck in a row. And Beatrice Hale was standing in the middle of the street screaming that her horses were still inside. "Nobody's going in that stable?" A man was shouting at her, holding her back by both arms. "Beatrice, it's gone. It's all the way gone." "They're my Harold's horses." Elias was already moving. Mara grabbed for him and missed. "Elias." "Bucket line," he called back over his shoulder, not stopping. "Get 'em on the hotel. Save the building, not the stable. The stable's lost." And then he was gone into the smoke, a lean shape, swallowed by the black-headed, for the one place every other man in that street had already decided not to go. For one terrible second, Mara stood frozen, watching the smoke close over the spot where he'd been. Then her father's daughter took over. "You heard him!" she shouted, and her voice cut through the panic because it was the only voice giving an order instead of a scream. "The well! The trough, form up 2 lines. Buckets to the hotel wall. We save the hotel, move." And nobody moved. Because moving meant crossing the line Rusk had drawn in this town for 3 years. The line that said you do not lift a finger for anyone. He's decided to burn, and every soul in that street knew as sure as the heat on their faces that Beatrice Hale's stable had not caught by accident on a windless a windy afternoon. They knew, and they stood. "He'll see us," a woman said, small. "If we help her, He's already seeing you," Mara said. "He's watching right now, wherever he is watching, to see if this town's still broke enough to let an old widow burn." She grabbed a bucket off the ground and shoved it into the nearest man's chest. The old man from the saloon, the one who'd gripped his table white-knuckled with shame, and she saw him recognize her, saw the shame flood up in him fresh. "You watched him grind my hand this morning and did nothing. Here's your nothing turning into something. Take the bucket." The old man took the bucket. He took the bucket, and he turned and ran for the well, and that was the crack in the dam. Because once one man had gone, the next man's fear had a smaller thing to overcome. He only had to be as brave as the man ahead of him. And Mara watched her father's whole terrible arithmetic prove itself in the space of 10 seconds. 1 person, then 2, then a line, then 2 lines, buckets coming up dripping and going down the row hand to hand and heaved against the smoking hotel wall, while the shakes hissed and steamed. And Silas Reed came pounding up from his forge with a fire axe over his shoulder, and waded straight into the wall of the hotel, where the fire was worst, and began tearing the burning shakes off the roof edge. An old deaf man swinging an axe, he could barely lift, shouting nothing, saying nothing, just breaking the fire's grip 1 shake at a time. Inside the stable, Elias could not see. He'd pulled his neckerchief up over his mouth and gone in on his hands and knees under the smoke, and the horses were screaming that sound. That particular high sound a horse makes when it knows that no man who's heard it ever forgets. And he followed the screaming feeling along the burning boards, and the heat was a living thing pressing down on his back, and one small clear part of his mind that had lived 12 years on a mountain waiting to die noted calmly that this would be a way to do it. He found the first stall by touch. The horse had backed itself into the corner, wild-eyed, and it struck at him with its forefeet when he got the gate open, and he took the blow on his shoulder and got a hand on its halter and hauled its head down and put his mouth right by its ear and said, "The thing you say, low and steady, the nonsense words that aren't words." And the animal shuddered and let him turn it, and he got it moving toward the gray square of daylight that was the door and shoved it, and it bolted free into the street. The second horse was down. It had gone down in its stall from the smoke, and it wasn't screaming anymore, which was worse. And Elias crawled to it and got both hands in its halter and pulled, and it did not come. Dead weight 1,200 pounds of it. And the roof of the stable made a sound overhead like a giant clearing its throat. And Elias knew that sound, and he had maybe 10 seconds, and no man alive could drag a downed horse out in 10 seconds. He let go of the halter. He would carry that later, letting go. Even knowing there was no choice in it, he'd carry the shape of that horse's halter in his hand for a long while. He turned and crawled for the daylight, and the roof came down behind him with a roar that punched the air out of the whole street, and he came out of the smoke on his hands and knees, coughing. Black hair singed the back of his vest. Smoking, and he collapsed in the dirt just past the door as the whole stable folded in on itself in a fountain of sparks. Mara was there. She'd broken from the line, and she was there on her knees in the dirt, her good hand pounding out the embers on his back, and she was saying his name over and over, and he heard it come to him through the roaring in his ears, like something from very far away. "I got one out," he rasped. "The other one I couldn't." "You're alive," Mara said fiercely. "You hear me? You got one out, and you're alive, and that's the whole of it. That's every bit of it." And that was when they both realized she'd said his own words back to him near enough, the words he'd said to her outside the saloon that morning, about her hand and something passed between them, there in the dirt and the smoke and the ash that neither one had time to look at, but both of them felt. The hotel was saved, scorched black up one whole side roof, half stripped by Silas's axe, but standing the bucket line had held it. The town had held it, and as the fire in the stable rubble burned down to a sullen glow, the two ragged lines of soot-streaked townsfolk stood in the street breathing hard and looking at what they'd done, and there was something in their faces that had not been there that morning. Not triumph, something more careful than triumph. The look of people who've just found out they're capable of something they'd been told for 3 years they weren't. Beatrice Hale stood in front of her saved, scorched hotel with her hands over her mouth and tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face, and she was looking at Mara. And then Amos Rusk came walking up the street. He came slow and easy through the thinning smoke, and the crowd parted for him the way it always had, and he stopped and surveyed the ruined stable and the saved hotel and the exhausted townspeople with their buckets, and he shook his head, slow, and he said in a voice pitched to Carrie, "Terrible thing. Terrible. I warned her about that stove this very morning, didn't I, Beatrice? Told you to be careful in this heat." He clucked his tongue. "Old dry building. These things happen." Nobody answered. That was the first thing Rusk noticed. Mara watched him notice it. 3 years, and this town had always answered him a nod, a murmur, a yes. Sheriff. And now, 2 lines of soot-black people stood in the street and looked at him and said nothing at all. And it was the exact same nothing this town had given Mara that morning, except now it was pointed the other way and Rusk felt it. She watched it land on him. "Well?" he said a little louder. "No harm done that can't be? Nobody's hurt, that's the—" Somebody said it. It was Silas Reed, the old deaf blacksmith, black to the elbows, still holding his axe, standing in the front of the crowd with his gray head up. He'd said it too loud the way he said everything, and it rang out over the whole street. "What's that, old man?" Rusk said. "I said somebody said it." Silas didn't lower his voice. He couldn't have if he'd wanted to. "Stable don't catch of itself on a day there's no lightning, and the stove ain't been lit since breakfast. Somebody set that fire. and I got a notion who on account of I'm not the only man in this town who knows what you're willing to burn." He was shaking, but he did not stop. "You want to threaten a widow's hotel at breakfast and burn her stable by supper? You go right ahead, Amos. But you'll do it now with the whole town looking at you instead of looking away." The silence after that was enormous. Rusk's hand had drifted slow to rest near his hip. Mara saw it. She saw Elias still on his knees in the dirt beside her see it too, and start to gather himself. But Rusk didn't draw on an old deaf man in front of 40 witnesses. He was smarter than that, or more of a coward than that which in Rusk came to the same thing. He let his hand fall easy away from the gun, and he smiled the thin smile. "That's a serious charge, Silas, from a man who can't hardly hear his own hammer." He looked around at the crowd playing the old game, the game that had always worked. "Anybody here see me light a fire? Anybody no? Then I reckon we'll chalk it up to a bad stove and a dry summer, and everybody'll go on home and we'll all forget. An old deaf man said a foolish thing in the heat. A beat. Won't we?" And for a moment, the old game teetered. Mara felt it. Felt the crowd want to take the out he was offering, want to go home, want to forget, because remembering was so much more dangerous than forgetting. Then Beatrice Hale spoke. "I'll say it, Amos." Her voice shook so bad she could hardly get it out, and she said it anyway. This frightened, brave woman standing in front of her ruined stable. "You come into my kitchen this morning and told me to mind my stove. Told me old buildings burn fast. Told me be careful. 4 hours 'fore my stable went up." She was weeping openly now, and she did not stop talking. "You've had your boot on me 3 years, Amos Rusk, since my Harold died, and I have shook, and I have scraped, and I have said yes, sheriff, and no sheriff, and hated myself every single day of it. And I am done." She turned to the crowd, to all of them. "You want to know why he's scared of that girl, why he burned me out for talking to her, because my Harold left proof. Proof of what Rusk's been selling and stealing. And I have been too much a coward to go find it until today." The whole street inhaled. Rusk's smile was gone. "Beatrice," he said, and there was no velvet left in it now, just the flat thing underneath the real thing. "You want to think real careful about your next word." "I've done all my careful thinking," Beatrice said. 3 years of it. I'm out." And Mara understood, watching Rusk's face go from white to gray, that Beatrice Hale had just done the bravest and most dangerous thing anyone could do. She'd told Rusk out loud in front of witnesses that the proof existed and that she was going to go find it. She'd painted a target on herself the size of the sky. She'd done it to save the town's nerve at the exact moment it was about to fail. And she'd done it knowing what it might cost. Rusk knew what it meant, too. Mara watched the calculation run behind his eyes cold and fast. "The proof is real. She's going for it. I have hours, maybe less." "Everybody go home," Rusk said abruptly, and it came out wrong too fast, the crack showing in it. "Show's over. Go on." Nobody went home. He turned and walked away, and he did not walk easy. This time he walked fast, straight for his office, and Mara watched him go and felt the whole thing tilt. "He's going to move it," Jonah Pike said low, appearing at her shoulder. He'd been in the bucket line the whole time, she realized, without his star, one more soot-black face in the crowd. "The strong box. He knows now. He's going to move the letter tonight, get it out of that office, ship it back to Denver, or burn it, and once it's gone, and there's no case. Beatrice just lit a fuse under him. He'll move on it tonight." "Then we move first," Elias said. He was on his feet now, unsteady, one hand on Mara's shoulder for balance, and neither of them acknowledging it. His voice was wrecked from the smoke, but the thing in it was steady as ever. "Tonight," he said. "We get into that office tonight before he can shift the box. Jonah, you said you've seen him open it. You know the room. I know the room. I know the box. I don't know the combination, and I can't get you the key. He keeps it on him." Jonah looked sick with what he was agreeing to. "But there's a window in the back off the alley painted shut. A man could—" He stopped. "A man could get in. It'd have to be quiet, and it'd have to be tonight. And if he catches you in there, he's within his rights to shoot you where you stand. And every soul in this town will swear you were a thief. Then he won't catch us, Elias said. I'm coming, Mara said. Elias turned to her. Mara, I'm coming, and don't you tell me it's too dangerous, because there is not one person in this whole scheme who isn't already dead if it goes wrong. She held up the wet gray scraps of her father's receipt, still in her fist, ruined, but never once let go of all day. And there's a reason it has to be me. Whatever's in that box, a letter, a price list, it'll have claim numbers, section lines, filing dates. You could pull the right paper and not know it. I've had my father's claim by heart since I was 10 years old. I know his claim number the way I know my own name. I'm the only person in this town who can look at a stack of papers in the dark and know in 1 second which one is the one. She held Elias's eyes. You need me in that room, and you know it. Elias looked at her a long moment. Everything in him she could see wanted to say no. And he didn't, because she was right, and because she understood this too in that look, because he'd learned 12 years ago what it cost a person to be shut out of their own fight to have men decide for them what they could and couldn't bear, and he would not do that to her. All right, he said. We go tonight. Late. When the town's asleep and Rusk thinks he's got till morning. He won't wait till morning, Jonah warned. I'm telling you, Beatrice spooked him bad. He might move it at midnight. Then we go before midnight, Mara said. And Beatrice Hale, who had come up to them through the crowd, soot-streaked and shaking and somehow taller than she'd been that morning, said, Then you'll need to know one more thing. And I only just now standing here thought to remember it on account of I've spent 3 years making myself forget everything about that awful book. She pressed her hands together. Harold's copy. I told you I don't know where he hid it. That's true. But I remember him telling me, the night he made it, he laughed. He said, B, I hid it in the one place in this county Amos Rusk will never in his life look. She swallowed. And I never asked him where because I was scared to know. But I've been standing here this last hour thinking and thinking, and Harold was a bookkeeper. A careful, dry, particular little man. And there's only one place a man like Harold thinks a thing is truly safe. Only one place he'd trust. Her eyes went wide with the certainty of it. It's in a book. It's got to be. He hid a page inside a book. And I've got Harold's whole shelf of ledgers and Bibles and almanacs sitting in a trunk in the hotel cellar that Rusk's fire didn't touch, that nobody's opened in 3 years because I couldn't bear to. 2 things then that had to happen before dawn. The letter in Rusk's strongbox that hanged him and the company both. And Harold's copy hidden in a book in a trunk in a cellar that proved Corwin Whitfield's claim came first. Beatrice, you find Harold's copy, Mara said. Tonight, quiet by candle, you go through every book in that trunk. Silas, you stand watch on the hotel. If Rusk comes for her, you ring that fire bell again, and the whole town'll come, because the whole town came once today, and now they know they can. She turned. Jonah, Elias, and me, we go for the office, and by sunup we've got both halves, or we've got nothing. Or we're dead, Jonah said. Or we're dead, Mara agreed. But we won't be dead alone, and I've decided today that's the only kind of dying I can't abide the alone kind. So. She looked at the 3 of them, this deaf blacksmith and this weeping widow, and this shame deputy, and this burned mountain man, this handful of frightened people who'd decided one at a time, over the course of one blistering summer day, to go first. Sundown. Sundown came slow and red through the smoke that still hung over the town. They waited it out separate, so as not to be seen together. Mara sat in the back of Silas's forge, with her crushed hand wrapped in a cool wet rag Beatrice had pressed on her, and she flexed the fingers, and they hurt, and she was fiercely glad of the hurt, because it kept her sharp. Elias sat across from her, cleaning his revolver by feel in the dark, not because he meant to use it, but because a man about to walk into a corrupt sheriff's office likes to know his tools are honest. You don't have to draw, Mara said quietly, watching him. If it goes wrong, You don't owe this valley your life. I know I don't owe it. Elias didn't look up from the gun. That's why I'm giving it. He turned the cylinder, checked the loads, closed it. 12 years I've been telling myself I went up that mountain because the world was rotten and there was no fighting it. That's a lie a man tells himself, so he don't have to feel like a coward for quitting. He finally looked at her. Truth is, I quit. I had the paper and I lost anyway, and it broke something in me and I quit, and I called it wisdom, and I sat up on that rock 12 years being wise while men like Rusk did to other people exactly what God done to me. His jaw worked. You want to know what you did to me this morning? Mara Whitfield walking into that saloon? You made it so I can't call it wisdom anymore. You made me watch it happen again from the outside. And I found out I'd rather die on my feet next to you tonight than live another 12 years being wise on my mountain. So no, I don't owe it. I'm just done keeping it. Mara didn't have any words for that. She reached across the dark and put her good hand over his, over the gun, and neither of them said anything. And outside, the last red light went out of the sky. It's time, Elias said. They went through the dark town like ghosts, the three of them. Jonah leading, because he knew the ground keeping off the main street, and the town was quiet, the way a town gets quiet when it's holding its breath. A dog barked somewhere and stopped. Somewhere Beatrice Hale was on her knees in a cellar going through her dead husband's books by one candle. Somewhere Silas Reed sat in the dark by the fire bell with his axe across his knees. The sheriff's office sat dark. No light in the front, no light in the back. He's not here, Jonah breathed. That's good. That's bad, Elias said. Where is he then? Man spooked like he was on the one night the proof might walk. He's not home asleep. He scanned the dark street. Where's Rusk? And that was the question that hung in the black air as Jonah worked the painted-shut window loose with his knife as it gave with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence as the three of them froze and waited and nothing came. Where was Rusk? Not home, not here. Not in the saloon, they'd passed it dark. Maybe he already moved it, Mara whispered as Elias boosted her through the window. Maybe we're too late and the box is empty. Her boots touched the floor inside. The office smelled of tobacco and old paper. She got her feet under her in the pitch black, reached back to help Jonah through, and Elias came last, and they crouched there, three shapes in the dark, listening. Under the desk, Jonah breathed. The box is under the desk, left side under the rug. Mara felt her way to the desk, found the rug, peeled it back, and her fingers found the iron edge of a strongbox set flush into the floor and the lid. The lid was open. Not forced. Open. Unlocked the hasp, thrown back the lid standing up on its hinge, and Mara's hand went down into it and found papers. A stack of them, not empty. He hadn't moved it. He'd opened it and left it open, and light flooded the room. A match then, a lamp its wick catching and flaring up gold, and there in the sudden light stood Amos Rusk in the doorway of his own back office, with the lamp in one hand and his revolver in the other, and he was smiling, because he had been sitting in the dark of the next room waiting for them. Because Jonah Pike had told them where the box was. But Jonah Pike answered to Rusk, and the box was open, because Rusk had opened it as bait. Evening, Rusk said. Was starting to think you weren't coming. And his gun was already up and already pointed, and it was pointed at Mara. Nobody moved. Rusk stood in the doorway with the lamp lighting up the pleasure in his face, and his gun did not waver off Mara, and for a long second, the only sound in the room was the small hiss of the lamp wick. You want to know the funny part, Rusk said. I didn't even have to think hard. Fella comes to me this afternoon, Jonah here, all sweaty and sick, says the mountain man and the Whitfield girl are stirring folks up. Says they're talking about my office, about a box, and don't I want to know their plans? He smiled at the back of Jonah's head. I said, Jonah, you're a good boy after all. You lead 'em right in here tonight and leave the box open so they think they got lucky, and I'll forget you ever wobbled. His eyes flicked to Mara. And here you all are. Mara turned and looked at Jonah Pike. Jonah would not look at her. He was staring at the floor, his whole body rigid, and Mara felt the bottom drop out of the night. Felt the deaf man and the widow and the burned mountain man, and every fragile thing they'd built that day, teeter on the edge of nothing. Betrayed, walked into a trap by the one man she'd argued was worth trusting. "You," she said. "You sold us." "Yeah," Jonah said. His voice was a scrape. "I did. This afternoon. I sold you." "Jonah," Elias started low, dangerous. "I sold you this afternoon," Jonah said again. And now he raised his head, and now he looked at Mara, and his eyes were wet and terrible and calm. "And then I went and stood in a bucket line and watched an old widow tell the whole town she was done being scared. And I thought about what kind of man sells people to Amos Rusk." His hand moved slow to his hip. "So I unsold you, Sheriff, about an hour ago, in my own head. I just didn't have the sand to tell you till now." And Jonah Pike drew. He was not fast. He was a decent, tired man who'd spent his life following orders, not a gun hand, and Rusk was already holding a leveled pistol. But Rusk's pistol was pointed at Mara, and in the quarter second it took him to swing it toward the real threat, Jonah had his own gun clearing leather, and both weapons went off so close together they made one sound that slammed through the little room like the roof coming down again. Jonah Pike spun and hit the wall and slid down it. Rusk staggered. Jonah's shot had caught him high on the left side, and the lamp dropped from his hand and smashed and guttered out, and the room went black, and in the black there was the smell of powder and coal oil and the ragged breathing of a wounded man, and Mara was on her knees, not knowing whose blood was whose. "Jonah," she got out. "Down," Elias said hard from somewhere in the dark. "Everybody down, don't move." Rusk's voice came out of the black, wet now, furious. "You shot me! You little coward, you shot me!" And there was the sound of him blundering, the gun going off again, wild, the muzzle flash lighting the room for one instant, like lightning, and in that instant, Mara saw everything. Jonah slumped against the wall with his hand pressed to his belly, Rusk wheeling with blood black down his side, and Elias already moving low and fast, crossing the room inside the flash. Then dark again, and a crash of bodies, and Mara heard the grunt of two men hitting the floor, and the scrabble of hands fighting for a gun, and she could not see which shape was Elias. And if she moved wrong in the dark, she might grab the wrong man, or catch a bullet meant for the other. So she did the only thing she could do. She scrambled for the smashed lamp, found the matchbox in her apron, by pure blind luck, struck one, and held the tiny flame up over a scene from a nightmare. Elias had Rusk's gun arm pinned to the floor with one knee and both hands, and Rusk, even shot, even bleeding, was bigger and was bucking under him like a bull, and the gun was between them, pointed at nothing yet, but swinging, and Elias's face in the matchlight was a mask of pure effort. "The gun," Elias grunted. "Mara, get the gun." She dropped the match and threw herself down and got both hands on the hot barrel and wrenched, and it came free. And she rolled away with it, clutched to her chest, and the fight went out of it all at once. Rusk unarmed and shot Elias's full weight on him, and Elias got Rusk's own wrists behind his own back and held them there while the sheriff cursed and heaved, and finally went still, breathing hard, beaten. "Light," Elias said. "Somebody get a light." Mara found the match again with shaking hands and lit the stub of a candle on the desk, and the room came up gold and terrible, and the first thing she did before anything, before the box, before Rusk, she went to Jonah Pike. He was gray. His hand was pressed to his side, and the blood was coming through his fingers. Dark, too much of it, and his breath came short, but his eyes were open, and they found her, and there was something almost like peace in them. "Bad?" he asked. "You're going to be fine," Mara lied, pressing her own good hand over his to hold the wound, and he almost smiled. "Don't. I clerked enough of these to know." He coughed. "Listen, the box. It's real. The letter's real. He never moved it. He was too sure of the trap. It's in there. Get it. Get it before—" Another cough, worse. "Before somebody thinks to burn this building down around all of us. Get it, miss. Make it mean something." Mara looked at Elias. Elias had Rusk pinned, But Rusk was done, and Elias gave her one short nod. Go. She went to the open strongbox. She knelt over it with the candle, and she began going through the papers with hands that would not stay steady. And it was deeds and receipts and lists in a cramped hand, and she made herself slow down, made herself read, because she was the only one in the room who could tell the one paper from all the others. And then she found it. A letter. Denver letterhead. Ash Valley Cattle Company. And below the greeting, a list Springs claims section numbers, and beside each one, a figure, a price. What Rusk would be paid to clear each one. And there, halfway down the page, was a claim number. Mara Whitfield had known by heart since she was 10 years old. Her father's claim. Ash Peak Spring, and beside it, a dollar figure and a check mark, done cleared, paid, and at the bottom of the page, in ink, plain as sin, the signature of Amos Rusk agreeing to every word of it. Mara's eyes filled. She could not help it. She held the paper in the candlelight, and she read her father's stolen water, reduced to a line item on a price list, and she thought of him dying alone in a line shack with nobody but his horse, thinking the claim was safe. Thinking he'd left his daughter something honest, and she wanted to scream and she did not because there was work to do. "I've got it," she said, and her voice broke clean in half. "Elias, I've got it. It's his signature. It's my father's claim number, and it's Rusk's signature, and it's the whole valley, spring by spring. It's everything." "Then that's the ball game," Elias said quietly, holding Rusk down. "That's the thing that don't wash off with a good lawyer. It washes off if I'm dead and it's Ash." Rusk snarled from the floor, face pressed to the boards. "You think you've won? You've got a shot. Deputy, a burned widow, a deaf smith, and a mountain hermit wanted in 2 territories, standing over a wounded lawman in his own office at midnight. That's how it'll read. That's how it'll always read. My word against a pack of—" "Your signature," Mara said, "against your signature." That shut him up. The candle guttered. Outside the town was waking. The 2 gunshots had carried, and there were voices in the street now, and a light bobbing, and the sound of running feet. Silas, Mara thought. Silas heard the shots, and he's ringing. And then the fire bell began to ring hard and fast across the sleeping town, the same bell that had called them all to save the hotel that afternoon. And Mara understood that Silas Reed was standing at that bell right now, waking every soul in Red Ash Crossing, calling them not to a fire this time, but to this, to the sheriff's office, to the reckoning, and the whole town was coming. "You hear that Amos," Elias said low by Rusk's ear. "That's the sound of a town that found out today it could come when it's called. You spent 3 years teaching 'em to stay in their beds. Took 1 widow and 1 bucket line to unteach it. And now they're coming, and this time they're coming to look at you." They came. They came in their night clothes with lanterns. They filled the street, and then the doorway, and they saw it. The wounded deputy, the pinned sheriff, the girl on her knees with a paper in her hand. And Mara stood up in front of all of them, swaying her crushed hand, and her father's ruined receipt, and now this letter. And she held the letter up in the lantern light. "You all watched him put his boot on my hand this morning," she said, and her voice carried because the street had gone silent to hear it. "And you did nothing, and I don't blame you because he'd taught you nothing was the only safe thing to do. But you came for Beatrice's fire this afternoon, and you came for that bell just now. So you're going to do one more thing before this night's over. You're going to look at this paper, every one of you, because when the circuit judge comes and Jonah, before this sent word down the line for the circuit judge, didn't you, Jonah? Ryder went out at dusk," Jonah whispered from the floor. "Judge Hollis, he'll be here by morning. I sent for him before I ever came here tonight, in case I didn't—" He couldn't finish. "When the judge comes," Mara said, "Rusk is going to say it's my word against his, and I need every one of you to have seen this paper with your own eyes, so that when he says that, there's 40 of you who know he's lying." And one at a time in the lantern light, the people of Red Ash Crossing filed past, and looked at the letter with Amos Rusk's signature on it, and looked at the sheriff pinned on his own office floor, and each face that looked came away changed, because you cannot unsee a thing like that. And Rusk had built his whole kingdom on people agreeing not to see. Judge Hollis rode in at first light, He was a lean old man with white side whiskers and a hard, fair face, and he'd ridden all night. And he came into a town that had not slept, and he set up court that very morning in the biggest room in Red Ash Crossing, which was the scorched dining room of Beatrice Hale's hotel. And he heard it all. He heard Silas Reed swear too loud that he'd watched Amos Rusk cut a page from the county book by lantern light last November and burn it in the stove. He heard Beatrice Hale, who had found it, who had come up out of her cellar at dawn gray with dust and streaming tears, holding a folded page pressed inside her dead husband's family Bible for 3 years, exactly where Harold said he'd hidden it, in the one place Rusk would never look inside. The Word of God. He heard Beatrice lay Harold's copy of the original claim entry on the judge's table. Corwin Whitfield, Ash Peak Spring, filed spring of 79, in a dead bookkeeper's careful hand dated years before the cattle company ever came. He heard Jonah Pike, gray and bandaged and propped in a chair because he would not stay in the bed. They'd made him confess his own part in front of the whole town. The doors he'd blocked, the things he'd held, the trap he'd set the night before and then broken, and then name Amos Rusk plainly as the man behind all of it. And he heard Mara Whitfield explain the letter, the claim numbers, the section lines, the price list for a whole valley's water. Her father's claim with a check mark beside it and a dollar figure, and Rusk's own signature at the bottom, matched now against Harold's copy of what the book had truly said. The two papers agreeing with each other and damning the sheriff between them. Amos Rusk sat through all of it with a bandage under his shirt and a lawyer beside him who'd come up from the company, and the lawyer was good. And the lawyer talked about a deaf man's uncertain eyes and a grieving widow's convenient memory and a wanted mountain man's grudge. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter because for once the paper mattered. Rusk's own hand had signed it, and 40 citizens had looked at it in lantern light and would not now say they hadn't. And a bookkeeper 3 years dead had reached up out of his Bible to prove what the book had really said. The judge ruled at noon. He restored the Ash Peak Spring and the North Bench grazing to Mara Whitfield whole, her father's claim honored as first and lawful. He voided every transfer the cattle company had bought through Rusk's stolen pages. And he ordered Amos Rusk held for the falsifying of public records, the theft of filed claims, the intimidation of witnesses, the arson of Beatrice Hale's stable, and conspiracy with the Ash Valley Cattle Company to defraud a whole valley of its water. And the town did not cheer. That was the thing Mara would remember. There was no shout, no throwing of hats. The dining room was full of tired, soot-stained people who'd been awake all night and afraid for 3 years. And when the judge brought down his gavel, they just breathed. A long, ragged, collective breath, the breath of people who've just been told the thing sitting on their chest for years is finally getting off. Somewhere, a woman began quietly to cry. Silas Reed sat down heavily on a bench and put his black-scarred face in his hands. Beatrice Hale reached out and took Mara's crushed hand gentle in both of hers. They took Rusk out to hold him for the marshal, and as they walked him past, he stopped in front of Mara. And his lawyer pulled at him, but he stopped, and he looked at her with those pale, unblinking eyes, and he said low, just for her, "One paper. 12 years I ran this valley clean, and one girl with one paper she wouldn't let go of." "2 papers, Mara said. "My father's and yours. You should have torn out both." And they took him away. Later, much later, after the judge had gone, and the crowd had thinned, and the sun had swung down the long, hot afternoon, Mara found Elias out at the edge of town where his horse was saddling it. She stopped. "You're leaving. Job's done." He didn't turn around. He cinched the girth, checked it. "You've got your spring. Rusk's going to the marshal. The company's transfers are dust. Jonah'll live. Doc says he'll live. Town's got its nerve back." He finally turned, and there was something closed in his face. Careful, the look of a man putting a wall back up brick by brick. "You didn't need rescuing Mara. You never did. You needed one person to go first, and I did. And now there's 40 of them who'll go first next time. That's better than one mountain man hanging around. So," he touched his hat, "I reckon this is where I go on back up." "Back up the mountain," Mara said. It's where I live. It's where you hide. Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't answer that. He gathered the reins. You said something last night, Mara said, not moving in the forge, before we went. You said you'd rather die on your feet next to me than live 12 more years being wise on your rock. You said you were done keeping your life to yourself. She took a step toward him. Rusk's beat Elias. The job's done, like you say. So what's your excuse now for getting on that horse? He stood with the reins in his hand and did not mount. I don't have one, he said, finally quiet. That's the trouble. 12 years I had a reason for everything I did, and the reason was always the same. It was stay away, stay safe, stay up where nothing can reach you. And I don't have it anymore. You took it. And I don't... His voice went rough. I don't know how to be a man who stays, Mara. I forgot. It's been so long I plain forgot how. And Mara Whitfield, standing in the hot dust with her father's spring restored, and her hand still wrapped, and the whole terrible day behind her, looked at this man who'd knelt in the filth of a saloon floor for a stranger, and walked into a corrupt man's gun for a valley that owed him nothing. And she said the truest thing she had, then don't get on the horse today, that's all. Not forever, just not today. Elias Boone looked at her a long, long time. Then he looked up the road toward the high blue timber where he'd hidden 12 years, and then back down at the town at the smoke-scarred hotel and the well, and the people moving slow through the late gold light, tired and free. And he let go of the reins. He let go of the reins, and he did not get on the horse that day. And it turned out one day was the hardest one, because after the first there were easier ones. But the easier days did not come right away, and they did not come free. The trouble started 3 mornings after the judge left, when a stranger in a good suit rode into Red Ash Crossing and asked politely for Miss Mara Whitfield. She met him on the porch of Beatrice's scorched hotel. He tipped his hat and gave a name Merrick, he said, of the Ash Valley Cattle Company Denver office, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he's certain of the ground under his feet, and he said he'd come to make her an offer. The company holds no grudge, Miss Whitfield, Merrick said. Business is business. Rusk was a bad instrument and he's answered for it. But that spring of yours is still the best high water in the basin, and I'm authorized to buy it. Fair price. More than fair. He named a number. It was a large number. It was more money than Corwin Whitfield had seen in his whole hard life. You take that you ride out of this dusty little valley a wealthy woman, and you never have to think about water or cattle or corrupt sheriffs ever again. Clean start. What do you say? And Mara understood standing there that this was the real ending. Rusk had never lived to see that the company did not need a crooked sheriff if it could simply buy the honest woman instead. That the noose had never really been about Rusk. Rusk was just the cheap way. This, the suit, the smile, the number, this was the expensive way, and it worked more often because it didn't feel like theft. It felt like a kindness. Behind her in the hotel doorway, she felt Elias go still. That's a lot of money, Mara said. It surely is. What happens to the valley, Mr. Merrick, after I take it? The small ranchers, the widows, the families whose wells went dry this summer while your company sat on the water. Merrick's smile didn't change. That's not really your concern anymore, is it? You'd be gone, wealthy and gone. No, Mara said. I don't reckon I would be. The smile flickered. I'm sorry. You heard me fine. She folded her arms. My father found that spring, Mr. Merrick, and he didn't file it so it could be sold to the highest bidder. He filed it because he'd watched this valley go thirsty one too many summers, and he thought water oughtn't belong to whoever's got the most money. He died believing that. And I just spent one whole terrible day and one whole terrible night, and Jonah Pike spent a bullet in his belly, and Beatrice Hale spent her stable, and Silas Reed spent his fear, and Elias Boone spent 12 years of hiding. All of us spent everything we had to keep that spring out of your company's hands. She stepped closer. And now you think you'll just buy it off me over a handshake because Rusk made it look ugly and you'll make it look clean. She shook her head slow. No, sir. Not for your number. Not for 10 of your number. That water is not for sale, and it is never going to be for sale, and you can carry that back to Denver." Merrick's smile was gone now, all the way gone, and the man underneath it was colder and plainer. "You're making a mistake, Miss Whitfield. The company is patient. Water's a long game. There'll be dry summers you can't manage, debts you can't cover, and we'll still be here when there are." He put his hat back on. "We always are." "Then you'll have a long wait," Mara said, "because I'm not planning to manage it alone." He rode out, and Mara stood on the porch with her heart pounding because turning down that much money is a thing that feels different an hour later than it does in the moment, and she waited for the doubt to come. It came, and Elias came out onto the porch behind her and stood beside her, not touching just there. "That was a lot of money," he said quietly. "I know it. You did right. I know that too." Her voice shook a little. "Doesn't make it feel like less money." Elias almost smiled. "No, it don't." He looked out at the dust where Merrick had gone. "But you said a thing just now I want you to hear back because I don't think you noticed you said it. He asked what you'd do and you said I'm not planning to manage it alone." He turned to her. "You keep saying that. Since the saloon. Not alone. One person goes first. It's the whole of you, Mara. And I've been standing in that doorway 3 days trying to work up the nerve to tell you I'd like to be one of the ones it ain't alone." Mara looked at him. "That's the closest thing to staying you've said out loud," she said. "I know it." His jaw worked. "It's hard for me. I know it is." She reached over, careful, and took his hand. Her fingers were healing now, the swelling gone down, and she could close them, and she closed them around his. "You don't have to say it all at once. You already let go of the reins. That was the hard part. The rest is just days, one at a time, same as everything." And Elias Boone, who had come down off a mountain to kneel in the dirt for a stranger, held the hand of a woman who would not sell her father's water for all the money in Denver. And for the first time in 12 years, he did not feel like a man passing through on his way to somewhere lonelier. What Mara did with the spring over the weeks that followed is the part of the story that folks in that valley still tell. She did not sell it. She did not hoard it. She opened it. She wrote a set of rules, plain ones in her own hand, the way her father would have, and she nailed them up in the mercantile and read them aloud in Beatrice's dining room so nobody could say they hadn't heard. The Ash Peak Spring would water any ranch in the valley that needed it at a fair fixed price that covered the keeping and not 1 cent of profit. And the widows and the families the company had driven into debt would draw first, and no man would ever again be made to choose between his cattle and his children over a drink of water. Fair rules. Shared water. Water by right, she said, not by fear. And the valley, which had spent 3 years learning to keep its head down, slowly lifted it. The small ranchers who'd been selling off their herds at a nickel on the dollar stopped selling. Wells that had gone dry got hauled water from the high spring till the rains came. A family named Dietrich, who'd packed their whole life into a wagon and were 3 days from leaving the valley forever, unpacked the wagon. And the Ash Valley Cattle Company, which had counted on thirst to do its work, found it had no work to do, and its buyers drifted off to easier basins and missed her. Merrick did not come back that year, nor the next. Jonah Pike healed slow, but he healed. When he could stand again, he did not ask for his star back. He said he'd worn it wrong too long to trust himself with it. But the town in a meeting gave it to him anyway, and made him swear a different kind of oath than the one he'd broken. And he wore it after that, like a penance and a promise. Both. And there was never a straighter lawman in the territory, because there's no honest man like one who remembers exactly what it cost him to become one. Silas Reed told his story so many times that summer that the deafness finally became a kind of joke. Instead of a shame, folks learned to holler it back to him. "You saw him burn it." Silas and the old man would grin his gap-toothed grin and holler back, "Damn right I did." He'd carried that stone a year alone. He never had to carry it alone again. And Beatrice Hale rebuilt her stable. She rebuilt it with lumber. The whole town turned out to raise the same folks who 3 years running had let Rusk squeeze her hammering and hauling in the cooling weather, and when it was done it was bigger and better than the one that burned. And over the door she hung a small wooden sign that said in her own uneven letters, "Harold Hale's Stable," so that her careful dead husband, who'd hidden the truth inside his Bible and saved a whole valley from the grave, would have his name up in the daylight at last. As for Elias, he did not go back up the mountain. He stayed. It was not smooth, and it was not easy. And there were mornings early on when Mara would find him standing at the edge of town, looking up at the high timber, with an expression she'd learned not to interrupt the pull of the old safe loneliness strong in him still. But he never saddled the horse. Every morning he chose the town over the mountain, and every morning it got a little easier, until one day he realized he hadn't looked up at the timber in a week, and he told Mara that, and she just took his hand. He built the fences for the spring. He rode the high country checking the water lines through the drought. He taught the Dietrich boys to break horses gentle. He put his hand to the valley the way a man does when he's finally decided the ground is his. And slow. So slow, neither of them could name the day it happened. The wound he'd carried 12 years began to close over. Not gone wounds like that don't go, but closed healed a scar. He could live beside instead of a hole he had to hide in. And on a gold evening at the turn of the summer, with the first cool coming down off the peaks and the spring running steady and full. Below them, Mara walked Elias up to the north bench, where her father's water came clear and cold out of the living rock. And there beside it stood a new sign, freshly cut, freshly lettered, that the whole valley had helped to raise. It said, "Whitfield Spring Water shared by right, not fear." Elias stood and looked at it a long while. "Your daddy'd be proud," he said finally. "I didn't build it for him." Mara stood beside him, close her healed hand in his. "I mean, I did some. But I built it for them. The valley. The next scared person who thinks they've got to face it all alone." She looked up at him. "And I built it with you, Elias. Every fence, every water line, every rule nailed up in that mercantile, you had a hand in all of it. Whatever else you decide about staying or going, that's true, and it'll be true after both of us are gone. You already built something here. You're already part of it. Nobody can take that back, not even you." Elias was quiet a moment. Then he took off his hat. He did it slow, the way he did everything, and he held it against his chest, and he stood there bareheaded beside her in the summer dust, with the spring running below them, and the whole free valley spread out gold in the evening light, and when he spoke his voice was low and rough and steady as bedrock. "I spent 12 years, he said, looking up at those mountains like they were the only place left that couldn't hurt me. Some place to hide till I was done. And I looked at 'em this morning, Mara, and you know what I saw." He shook his head slow. "Not a hiding place. Not anymore. Just high country. Pretty country. Someplace a man might ride up to of a summer afternoon and then ride home from." He turned and looked at her, and his eyes were clear, and the wall was gone all the way down. "Because I've got a home to ride home to now. First one in 12 years. And I ain't leaving it. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I'm done running Mara Whitfield. I'm done hiding, and I'm done being wise on a rock, and I'm done being alone. I'm staying, for good, for all of it. If you'll have me." And Mara Whitfield, who had walked into that town alone with nothing but a torn receipt and her father's stubborn jaw, who had been thrown to the floor and stepped on and told to leave, and offered a fortune to disappear. Mara Whitfield looked at the man standing hat in hand beside her father's freed water, and she smiled, and she gave him the answer she'd been giving this whole valley since the first hour she rode in. "You won't have to do it alone," she said. "Not ever again. That's a promise, Elias. And I keep mine." He put his hat back on. He drew her in against his side. And together they stood on the high bench and looked out over the valley, over the rebuilt stable, and the freed wells, and the ranches that had stopped selling over Silas's smoking forge, and Jonah's honest star, and Beatrice's daylight sign, over a town that had learned one frightened soul at a time that the silence breaks the moment one person decides to speak, and the water ran clear and cold and shared below them, the way a good man had always meant it to, and it would run that way for every summer still to come. And no one in that valley was ever made to stand alone again.